Hi, I'm Bob from Fingerclick Productions, and this is another video update on the progress that's been made in post-production on One Night Stand, a feature film that I wrote and directed, and we shot not the summer just past, but the one before that actually. So I always knew when making this film that I'd eventually be doing the colour grade, and this is something I enjoy doing, and I really wanted to take advantage of the Blackmagic Cinema camera, which you can shoot in RAW, which I'll kind of explain later. But basically it means that you can kind of have a lot of room to move about and work with the colour in post-production. This program is DaVinci Resolve 12.5, and this is also made by Blackmagic, people who make the cinema camera. It's very good. It's got quite a steep learning curve, but once you know how to use it, it's very powerful. The main thing it does that I really like is you can see up here in the top right of the screen, you have nodes, and basically each of these is another effect applied, and these are all applied in order. And this just kind of makes it really easy to build up a look for each shot, and you can kind of see exactly what change you've made where and disable and enable ones as you want. Working with raw footage, this is basically very high quality footage that if I disable all these, you can see this is what the original footage looks like. So it's quite low contrast, quite desaturated, and the camera does this just to give you a little bit more room to play about and change things after you've filmed. So nothing's overexposed, nothing's underexposed, and you can change a lot of settings down in this panel here that you'd normally set on the camera. I don't want to change too much because I don't want to get away from what the DOP wanted, but we can do useful things like here in the white balance, if I change this to as shot, you can immediately see that this is a little bit kind of orangey, especially in the whites. And if I go to here and choose one of these presets for tungsten bulbs, which is the lights that we use to film, it changes the color temperature there, and you can see that immediately this is all a little bit whiter, and things that are white in real life look white on screen. Once I'm happy with other settings like exposure, again I don't want to change things too much, I can now start grading. So the first thing I do is I bring up the saturation. And immediately you can see it's made a huge difference, especially to colours like the reds here. After I went through each shot and decided on what I want for the saturation, I then do another pass, and in this next node, I change the contrast and brightness. You can see that I've enabled that, and immediately shadows have got a little bit darker, just made it a little bit more punchier. You can see here that the black trousers and the black hoodie, black is black. I've also added what's called a contrast curve, which I won't explain too much about just now, but you can see if I take this off, immediately everything's kind of has a lot less contrast, and if I put it back on again, it's a little bit more punchier. So once I was happy with the saturation and contrast for each shot in the film, I then got started on what's called the secondary color correction, which is just basically little adjustments and changes. So one of the first things I did is if I enable this one, you can clearly see in the black here for the hoodie and the couch, if I just turn this on, immediately it's kind of brought a lot more blue into the shadows. And this is a trick that you'll see on big budget Hollywood films, kind of taken to the extreme. Like Transformers movies or things like that might have an orange car set against a bright blue sky. This is just basic colour theory. It's two colours on the opposite side of the colour wheel that contrast well against each other. And the reason I put blue into the shadows is it contrasts well against skin tones and kind of brings out the colours in the face a little bit. However, this is a little bit too strong. If I turn it off and on, you can see what I mean. I think that's a little bit too obvious. So I have a little node here right at the end, just before the output, which effectively takes saturation out of shadows. So the darker something is, the less saturated it is. So if I turn this on, you can immediately see that's now a lot better. With it off, you can see that it's a little bit more blue. Turn it on, and it's a little bit subtler. You also see in the red here of James's top, kind of brings it down a little bit, which I think looks a little bit more natural and a little bit more real to life. Another thing I've done is part of the secondary color correction is if I enable this node, which you can see is actually parallel to this one, meaning they're applied at the same time rather than sequentially. If I turn this on, it's immediately kind of brightened up their faces a little bit. What this is a window I've applied. This is what I've done in quite a lot of shots. You can see there that it's just this area and then kind of smoothly fades off. And I've just brightened it up a little bit and kind of boosted the saturation, which just really brings out the skin tones and kind of draws your eye to the actors' faces, which, you know, of course is where the emotion is. Turn that off and on. You can see it just kind of makes it look a little bit better. Another thing that we've been able to do, because we shot this film in widescreen format, which is 16:9, which is basically every computer screen, TV, laptop screen, and we shot it in that format, but I always want to output in what you see here, which is 2.35:1, where it has these black bars up at the top and bottom. I really like this because it gives you more horizontal space to play with. I like the look of it. You can see here we've got the three actors next to each other, and not as much space above and below. The only problem is there were some shots where the actors got slightly out of frame, and by this point in the movie we're doing a little bit more handheld stuff. I think it was actually myself that shot this because the room was very crowded and we all couldn't fit in, so I'm to blame for this one. What is nice about shooting in widescreen and then cropping is that I can actually move the whole thing down a little bit. I think that looks a lot better. Their heads aren't being cut off. That's because behind these black bars is actual footage. It's not black, we actually filmed that. And that's a little safe margin for us. So I can move footage up and down. If I'm happy with everything else, I've then applied this last node, which I've just called finishing, which is a combination of two. And if I turn it on, you can see it's basically a vignette. So around the edge of the screen here, it's got a little bit darker. And in the center of the screen, it's got a little bit brighter. There's also a very, very subtle sharpening effect being applied in the center, and very subtle blurring effect being applied on the outside, just to kind of draw your eye even more to where I want it to go. It's also made things a little bit more interesting in the background. If I turn it off, you can see that this wall, which is basically a plain white wall, if I turn it on, it's a little bit more interesting. So this is stuff where we could have lit it better at the time, but for whatever reason we didn't think of it or didn't notice. I can now just kind of work on that and make it a little bit more visually interesting. This is one of my favorite shots in the film. If we go right back to the start, this is the footage we started off with. And this was shot in quite a hurry. This was at the end of the day. We got some amazing takes, some amazing performance from the actress. But I think we didn't have, I can't remember to be honest how we lit it, but I don't think we had time to do it properly. And as you can see, it's quite dark and washed out. I think also there was a fluorescent light in the hall, which we had no control over. So you can see this kind of little green tinge very subtly, especially on the skin tones. So let's just go through it bit by bit. First, and actually maybe counterintuitively, I'll have this last node enabled first. This is to desaturate the shadows. Because I always have this on and it's always the last thing that happens before the video gets output, it's kind of easy to always have it on and know that everything I do beforehand then has to pass through it. So I'll put the saturation up, and immediately it's looking a lot better. These blues have really been brought out, which really helps to kind of work on the art direction that's been done. Blue is a theme of this character, and so it's quite nice to have that as well in the background. Her skin is a little bit brighter. That's with it off. That's with it on, it's a tiny bit better, brought a little bit more colour into it. Then we'll go into the contrast, which actually made it darker, but kind of made the highlights brighter and the shadows darker, which looks a little bit better. And we'll deal with brightening up the actress herself in the secondary colour correction. So here you can see we've brightened up her face a little bit. Again, this is just a window. You see there, it's just focused on her face. And this actually follows through. There we go. This is kind of the same thing. If we turn that on, you can see that's much better now. That's really put some colour into her skin. I think I raised the saturation and boosted the colour a little bit. You can see without and on again, it's got rid of that kind of green tinge. This one here, this is quite complicated. This isn't for the actress, this is to bring out the colours in the background. What you can see here is basically everything that's not grey, that's what's being highlighted. This is done with a mixture of windows. You can see I've just selected that area there and the banister of the stairs. And then what's called a qualifier, which I pick a certain colour, change the parameters, and it selects only a certain colour. So you can see that's the blue there, but not the slightly different shade of blue in the background. And the shadows there, it's not picking up them, it's just picking up that shade of blue. And you can see if I turn that off and on, that's just making everything else, everything behind her, bringing that blue colour right back into it again. Really kind of making it a little bit brighter and a little bit more interesting. However, it's made this wall in the background, which looks white, it's made that look a little bit more blue. So I've got this last one here, which just drops the saturation, see that's now gone to white. Put it back on. You can see that again, that's just this wall selected. And that's it, a little bit more blue and a little bit white. It's just kind of add a little bit of contrast and make these blue railings stand out a little bit more. Another really nice shot from the film. Everything outside looked amazing. We shot this at about 6 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the summer. Our director of photography, Greg, specialises in landscapes and shots like this. I didn't have to do much to this. If we take it back to the original footage, that already looks quite nice. I'll boost the saturation. Brightness and contrast made it a little bit brighter. Secondary, you can see that it's made the shadows a tiny little bit bluer. It's very subtle. And again with the finishing, just add a little bit of a vignette. At some point I might go back in and brighten up their faces, but to be honest, this looks really nice. I don't want to do too much to it. Something which took quite a long time, but I think is worth it, is going through all the close-ups and brightening up individual little parts of the actors' faces. So in the secondary colour correction, I've done stuff that I've done in every other shot, where I've just brightened up the face. But I've also added in this one here, where you can see around the eyes. That's basically adding in just a kind of a little beam of light, just kind of again draw the eye, and bring a little bit of light to the eyes because that's where the emotion is when the actor is acting. I've taken that even further with another node, which you can see that actually makes the eyes themselves a little bit brighter. This is a window that I've done for each eye, and you can see if I drag through it actually tracks to where the eye moves. This is a small little difference, but I think it does quite a lot. Just kind of makes the eyes a little bit brighter and again just draws your eye. Something slightly different in this shot is after I've applied the saturation, I've then done two different types of contrast. If I apply these one at a time, you can see that that's that half of the screen. It's blocking out that. And this is that half of the screen. This is because in the original one, the original shot, we maybe didn't like this as well as we could have, and James is a little bit darker. So if I enable these again, kind of it brightens him up a little bit more than this part of the screen and tries to equalize it out a little bit. So thanks for watching. Hopefully that explains why it's taken so long on the color correction side of things. And there's been a lot of work going into it, as you can see. I've been trying to make it look as best as I can. The art director and the director of photography did such a good job with creating a look for the film that I've really just been building on that, bringing out things like the blue color that was a theme chosen for Mary, and the red color that was a theme chosen for James. And you can see that kind of throughout other parts of the film. There are some shots which were quite dark just because we didn't light them properly, or we didn't set settings on the camera. This was the first time I'd used the Blackmagic Cinema camera, and I've brought it up in post, but it's kind of added a little bit of grain into certain parts of the image, which just happens when you kind of brighten up a digital image more than you should. There's very good noise removal tools in DaVinci Resolve, but they're quite time consuming and they're quite process heavy on the computer. So they'll be applied once I'm happy with everything else. There's a few other fixes to be made, little digital effects, removing an actor's tattoo in one scene, kind of straightening up some other shots and keying out objects that aren't meant to be there. Just little mistakes we made that we decided we just had to fix in post. But I'll do another video on that at some point once I've kind of made a little bit of progress. So thanks for your patience. If you just follow our Facebook page and website for more details, and we'll keep you updated. Thanks a lot.